Want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Let's get nuts.
Let's get nuts, because today we're talking about the newest movie to hit theaters this past week. We saw the movie
The Flash.
What's happening?
You changed the future. And you changed the past.
What did you do?
Want some help?
You're.
Yeah. I'm Batman.
Holy.
The Flash.
And we're going to break it down
Yep.
in the back of the minivan, because that's what we do on the Minivan Movie Club. My name is Brett Gray. His name is Nick Wiggum, and we're friends. We're best friends, and we like to review movies. So let's do that as we get to The Flash. Knee-jerk response, what did you think of the film?
I thought it was fun. I think that there's some obvious complaints that can be made about things like CGI. But if your main objective going to see a movie is just to have a good time, I think there's plenty of that to be had.
Yep. So I feel similarly. My knee-jerk response to the movie when I walked out of theaters was that was solid. There wasn't anything that was super terrible. There wasn't anything that was super great. And in a cataclysm, that kind of speaks to the entire DCU.
Yeah.
There hasn't been anything really great to come out of it. There hasn't been anything really good to come out of it. And surprisingly, when I just thought about DC movies, this felt like an upper echelon DC movie, but more of like if you were comparing it against like an MCU movie, kind of just like a mid-tier film. There wasn't anything to write home about, nothing to be too upset or too excited about.
Yeah, it's not something that I don't think it's going to cause people to really miss like the Snyderverse version of this. As a close, it's probably the perfect, like you said, summation of what the Snyderverse was. Just kind of some good, some bad, a lot of like kind of head-scratching moments of where is this really going, and then we're left just what does this mean for the future?
Yep. So what were some of the things you liked about the movie, some of your pros?
Some of the pros, I thought that Ezra Miller did a good job of portraying two characters at once on screen. We were able to get the current version, Barry Allen, to be a little bit more mature because he was dealing with such an immature version of himself. And that way you kind of got to see some growth live in the movie, and so I thought that played well. I thought the relationship with his mom was really, really, really well done, and I enjoyed the explanation of how time travel works by them. I don't know that it's the most accurate version, but it was fun to have their own version, and they broke it down in a unique way with the spaghetti noodles.
And it made sense. I liked how that specifically made sense. It wasn't like, oh, this is just really convenient way to explain it. Like, oh, well, the way that things would like reverberate through all of time, forwards and backwards, is kind of an interesting take.
Yeah, it was a new, unique position on it, different from what we've seen from MCU time travel, different from what we've seen from recently in our rewatch of Back to the Future.
Yep.
But it was still something that was very clear, not too convoluted. Okay, it makes sense for this story.
Can we just take a second and talk about how odd it is that some of the movies that we've reviewed just this summer have become really relevant to other movies that we've been talking about? I mean, you see so much of Spider-Man, you see so much of Back to the Future, even parts of like Avatar in this movie where they're talking about things that are not necessarily related. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see the whole Eric Stoltz thing, and Back to the Future. They make a reference to Tom Cruise and Top Gun. Like, there's so much that comes up, and I thought that was really funny.
Well, I did some like research digging on Wikipedia, as one does as a modern scientist, and I found that this movie they've been trying to make a Flash movie since the 80s, and like it's gone through as many producers and directors and lead actors as you can imagine. But at one point, they actually had the director and the creator of Back to the Future
Robert Zemeckis
as their top target for the director of this movie, and he was doing something else. Probably at that time when it was about time that Flight came out, so I imagine it was probably that movie with Denzel, which is really interesting because they do have several references to Back to the Future, and it's super funny in the way they bring that in.
I think all in all, there was a couple of big highlights You mentioned the relationship that Barry has with his mom, Nora. That scene at the very end to really drive the emotional arc home.
Yeah.
I thought that was really perfectly done. It hit me with the feels. And in a movie where the third act really felt a little bit convoluted, I do think that really brought me back to the Flash part of this movie. The Flash origin.
It felt organic. Like
Yep.
his mom loves him, and you could tell the actress and him portrayed that so beautifully.
Yep, I thought it was really, really nicely done. Second pro, I really loved all the Batman.
Yeah.
All the Batman. All of it. If there was Batman in this movie, I liked it. Even the part that you didn't like, I did like it.
Yep.
Because, one, that gives me hope that, Andy Muschietti, whatever his name is, who directed this movie, he is tabbed to direct The Bold and the Brave. The Brave and the Bold?
Brave and the Bold.
The Brave and the Bold, the new Batman movie for the DCEU. So I'm really, really excited about that. That gives me hope because the action sequences, the visuals, the way that we saw things, they were done stylistically different from each Batman. So that tells me that whatever the Batman is, this next Batman, it will be in good hands.
Yeah, they were different and they were all cool, in a cool, unique way. Yeah.
Another side note on Batman is I learned that across all the multiverses there is a Batman. So the same way that Doctor Strange loves Rachel in every universe, there's also a Batman in every universe.
Yeah, there is always a Batman. So there we go.
That was really, really important to me to know that there's a Batman in every universe.
So how did you feel? I know that the ending's been talked about a lot. That final scene, they get out. There was originally.
Side note: this is a minivan. Minivans don't have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, you don't have to listen to be on this comment.
Yeah, so this comment in particular is very spoiler heavy. How did you feel about the final reveal of Clooney Batman?
So I've seen many different reactions to this. My initial gut reaction was, oh my gosh, that is hilarious and so funny. I loved it. Just as a total, in a movie where we were gagged all these different Batmans, it's just funny to see George Clooney show up and who the hell are you? That is really funny to me. I did not take it any further than does that mean he's the new Batman? Is he the older Batman for this Bold and the Brave? I don't know. I could totally see it because I think
James Gunn came out today or yesterday and said that they have not cast Batman yet.
I believe that George Clooney is honestly, him and Christian Bale are probably the best actors to play the character. Even though I think a lot of people really like Ben Affleck as Batman, his portrayal of Batman.
Yeah.
I think that George Clooney is probably one of the best actors to just play the character, and it's not his fault that he was cast to play in
he didn't write the movie
card and Batman with nipples. That's not
he didn't write the movie. He didn't add all the
so
props
I could
in.
see that, but I didn't see it as any more than just oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I mean, you got the Superman that we got to see.
And it's worth noting, you can't have Robert Pattinson because that's an Elseworld story that's currently going on in DC. So they don't want to connect that. And you can't really do Christian Bale's Batman because Christian Bale's Batman with Christopher Nolan's new universe, that's where other superheroes don't really exist. So that would be a totally big step to bring him in. So it just makes the most sense if you're going to do something silly like that. Yeah, I liked it. What did you think?
So I think it's actually, I think we definitely won't see any of the Batman that we saw in this movie portray the character
ever again.
I mean, they'll be in other movies, but I don't think that they'll play Batman. I think that was them closing the door for them in the DCU. Who wasn't in the movie was Christian Bale.
Okay.
He's getting close to the age of what it would be for Dad Batman to have a kid be brought in and him be more of a rugged type thing. I don't know if you keep it as Nolan's Batman, if it's a different version, but I think that does kind of slightly leave the door cracked because he's the only Batman that didn't come back for it, and we saw all the other ones have that door fully closed besides Val Kilmer, who's obviously not going to reprise that role. So I think it kind of leaves a sliver of hope that maybe he comes back. I don't know if he will. I think there's plenty of other great actors who could put on the cowl and be a good Batman.
That brings up a good point because here we're talking about the Flash and we both mentioned Batman, and then we're talking about all the Batman moments and this we skipped the whole movie and go to the Batman. Do you think this felt like a Flash movie or like a Batman movie with Flash in it, or was this what do you think about that?
So I think that's why they've gone through so many people is like they don't even trust the Flash to stand on his own two legs to make a movie. Like Batman is the highlight of this movie for the most part, even if it's the closure you get from Michael Keaton, getting to see him on screen again. And I think Ezra Miller does a good job on screen, but they still did. Even in the earlier scripts for the DCEU version, they had Cyborg. They didn't trust him, Ezra Miller, to carry the movie, and I think that speaks volumes to the kind of confusion around the whole DCEU. Is that do y'all like this character? Why are y'all still even using this actor?
Well, I guess what I'm confused, and so aside from some of my other big contention points, I did not like the baby shower at the very beginning of the movie. I've made some dead baby jokes in my lifetime
Not
that
me.
were ill-timed.
I would never say something like that.
And like that would be like maybe like a inappropriate or some crass humor, but like throwing 10 babies out of the side of a building and then like joking that you can't move them quickly, otherwise you'll make them throw up. So the solution is to put them in a microwave.
Which is like something that Ezra Miller as a human may actually do. So.
Like, yeah, he might actually do those types of things. And then later on in the movie when they talk about like, oh yeah, we killed baby Superman. Like, there's a lot of dead baby or like dangerous baby humor.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if this is the time to do that. So this is my take. I disagree with you. I think that Ezra Miller played this character okay. I don't think he did it really well. You and I had a conversation like, do you like this character? And I can't answer that. When I left the movie, I was like, there are parts of it where like the humor hit. There were parts of it that fell a little flat, where I didn't feel as close. I definitely didn't relate to younger Barry. And I think I figured out why is because the Flash, especially like Justice League Unlimited or some of the animated series, he has this like swagger where he's confident, but he's cool, but he's also a little bit nerdy. And Ezra just plays him really like spastic-y in certain moments.
Yeah.
He's got his calorie counter where he's hyper, on this specific thought. Is there an actor that you think could have done this better?
I think for what they were going for, he was probably as good as it may have gotten for like spazzy. I think that there's definitely a better actor for like what I would hope to see out of a Flash movie.
Can I give you a suggestion?
I will allow it.
I think that this role of the Flash is like screaming for Andrew Garfield. He's got the charm. He's got the like. He can be annoying where you're like not rooting for him, but like he's still as endearing. Like I think of some of those scenes in like The Amazing Spider-Man where he's like tripping over people and saving Gwen, and people are like,
that type of personality.
That type of personality. Like he's like, oh, sorry guys. Like that is who Andrew Garfield like is. Everyone thought he played a great Peter Parker. When he was in the suit, he was a great Spider-Man. And I think we were missing that level of like humor from him in the suit, whereas this one's like he's trying to figure out who he is, figure out what his powers are exactly, how to use them. I think that in the future they can do that. And the reason I'm kind of bummed about that is I think the Flashpoint Paradox is one of the greatest comic book stories. And I actually think it's really cool to do like this big team-up movie while it's also an origin story. It's very different than Marvel.
Yeah, I like the way that they kind of handle
I think that's kind of cool. I just wonder if like they didn't tell the exact right story with the exact right actor. So maybe they can revisit this. But I would just have a hard time if you're the studio touching this property again anytime soon.
Yeah, it'll be a while.
And it just feels like the wrong time.
So that's my one kind of hang up is like I think it was pretty cool. It was a fun movie. But like Flashpoint is such like an iconic comic.
Truly good.
That it's like if you're gonna say, well, does it live up to Flashpoint? Probably not. Even the animated movie, which is awesome, you can find it. I believe it's on
HBO Max. Yeah.
Fantastic. So fun. And it was actually closer to that was one of the more original scripts because the original writers of the DCU version were the writers of Into the Spider-Verse, and they were set to direct, and they actually chose to do Solo, which didn't really work out for DCEU or for
what could have been
Lucasfilm. So, but I have to imagine that their version of the script was probably a little more interesting, and so
there was. I mean, Jeffrey Dean Morgan was set to be Thomas Wayne in the animated version of the Flash Paradox. that's the story.
Yeah,
is
that's the Batman.
the Flash is working with Batman, who is Thomas Wayne, alternate universe where Bruce Wayne was the one that was killed, and so Thomas Wayne is like a very gritty, like killing Batman.
yeah,
he uses
he's-
guns.
Yep.
All the rules are broken, and the Flash, our Flash, is kind of in this also. I think that would have been a better story, even though I loved the Batfleck versions that we saw. I loved Michael Keaton's Batman. That was all great. I even liked the Supergirl stuff. I just wonder if there was a different story to be told here where Barry doesn't lose his powers. I like the idea of Barry having to learn to use his powers differently, to teach himself his powers, as opposed to just like, oh, it's super convenient, like so many origin stories or superhero stories, like, oh, you lost your powers, now you have to
That's
learn
like
to deal
always
with
the
them.
first
Yeah.
movie in any arc is like, oh, you have powers, you lose them.
Yep. So I think that would have been interesting. I also tend to think that what if they would have just done, Barry goes into another universe and he thinks he's saving Superman, but it's Supergirl. They do all this stuff without all the Flashpoint stuff. I don't know. I really think that the true Flashpoint paradox story of him partnering with Thomas Wayne, that's something that we've never seen before. And even when you watch the animated version, I think it's like an hour and 12 minutes. You watch it like this would be a really kick-ass movie.
Yeah, you're just thinking.
So
oh,
for
dude, this
them
is
to
so
have
cool.
missed that opportunity feels that, and then not to mention we've kind of burned Batman, Michael Keaton's Batman. He can't come back. I wouldn't expect him to come back in a like Batman Beyond type movie or
No.
series because he's so good in this. He says the great line like, "We can't bring you back." It's like, you already did. So that felt really fitting and kind of feels like the conclusion of Michael Keaton as Batman.
And he's also 71, so
Yeah.
it's probably likely we won't see him again. I hope that we are sitting here in 2 or 3 years and we're enjoying another Batman. I hope the DCU is off to a good start. I know that there's some people that are held up because before this movie was released, James Gunn, Tom Cruise, several people said this is one of the best superhero movies ever made. And I have to think that if they truly believe that and that they weren't just trying to hype up the movie to get people in because they saw what happened to Shazam for the dying DCEU, that has to be the nostalgia, because when Batman came out with Michael Keaton, both Tom Cruise and James Gunn would have been in their low to mid 20s. So they were about the age that most of us were. Yeah, whenever they watched like Infinity War or Captain America Civil War, and just like how those movies have become so special to us.
Yep.
So I can only imagine if we get to 30 years from now and we watch one of those actors come back and play. We watch Tom Holland come back and kind of coach up a new superhero. I'm sure that we would have different emotions that kind of attach to that. But as a newer audience who like obviously have seen that Batman several times, and as you pointed out, it's so rewarding to watch that movie and then come back and watch this.
Yeah, if you haven't seen The Flash yet, go watch The Batman 1989 and then go watch this movie. You will appreciate it so much more with having watched that, and it's on Max. Go watch it on Max.
But without that being like the pinnacle of like what you had seen, I just can't. This movie can't be up there with the great. It's like you said, in a mid-tier Marvel movie.
It's not bad,
and it's not bad.
And
it's fun.
So that touches on like my big problems, like the big beefs that I have. I don't think that Ezra Miller is like the right character. He's not a bad actor.
No.
Then there are parts of this that are really good. The moment that he has with Nora at the end is phenomenal. I felt the emotion, the lump in my throat, the warmth behind my eyes. I felt it. Second big beef I have is I think that this story is very ambitious for an origin film, and that's part of like the mess of the DCU. Is I just don't understand why they didn't say let's just tell a Flashpoint story. I expect that they thought that they'd be somewhere much further when they started this movie.
Yeah.
But you've got to cook with what the ingredients you've got, and Flashpoint is a great story on its own. I would have loved to have seen that. And then I also just think that they just got a lot of hype from directors, from other people saying things, big actors. James Gunn saying that he thinks this is going to be the best superhero movie made of all time. That's very, very high praise.
Yep.
And I just wonder if that put different ideas into the movie that you didn't need. We went into watching Multiverse of Madness, and we keep talking about this movie every week.
The madness.
My goodness. We should go back and see how many, we should have a little
references.
tracker.
Yep.
Next episode, we're going to put a tracker in the back for we've gone this many episodes without having a Multiverse of Madness incident. But there was so much expectations. We were like, man, if I just go in there with a little bit different expectations, that movie's probably fine. But instead, I went in there with these huge expectations, and then it fell short. This, I think, falls victim to the expectations again. So take a step back and look at the things that are very good truths. Answer this question. What components do you need to make a good comic book movie?
You need good action.
Yep.
You need something that grounds it in heart, whether that's parents or family members or friendship. You need something to bring you back to reality because you're in such a scientific world. And typically, many of the good ones have some sort of humor element to some degree. You have The Dark Knight, which has some funny moments, but it's largely not anything like an MCU movie. And then you have all the way to some MCU movies that do it really, really well with Thor Ragnarok.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
So I think that at the core, there are three things. So there's excitement. There's a spectacle element that I get to see the powers, the suits, the fun. That's exciting. And then there's obviously the action. Those sequences have to make sense. They have to be riveting. And we see some really good Batman. We see some really good Flash. We see some Zod. There's a lot going on here. Really, really good stuff. And then there also needs to be a story that is told that has some emotional pull. In general, I think that there's maybe a few of those things that are missing, but at the core of it, if you don't have those three things, you're not going to be a very good comic book movie.
Yeah.
So even though I think that there's some gaping flaws in this movie, if I take a step back and I think about it, this movie's a good comic book movie.
Yep.
So it's tempting for me to go watch all of the Screen Crush reviews and the new Rockstars reviews and say, you know what, the VFX choices are trash. And I do think they are trash.
Yes,
I really
they're
do.
very bad at times.
Yes, the director has said it was a choice. Well, it was a bad execution on the choice. There's so many other ways that you could have done that, and it just looks like crap. To where the emotional moments in that arc and the realization of the third act of what's happening, it's just a mess, and it takes me out of being able to focus on what's happening. It takes me out of the Flash story. Whereas when I'm in the grocery store with Nora, that's
nice.
That's just the story, baby, and it's all there. So, but when I look at this story, I think what are the things that are really holding it back? And I gotta think, we've talked about Multiverse of Madness. We've talked about everything everywhere all at once. We talked about a lot of multiverse stuff. We just talked about Spider-Man. I think that multiverse sagas are not good for movies.
Well,
I think you can go visit a multiverse, but trying to tell the story of the multiverse is really difficult. Probably the best version of it has been Loki, because he has gone and traveled, but we're seeing it from his specific perspective. And then the other version of that is probably Spider-Man No Way Home. But again, those are people that came to people from different multiverses that came to a specific point in time. Yeah. And when they started Spider-Man, they didn't plan on making 3 different Spider-Man. The way that multiverse comic books start is someone has an idea what if Batman was old? Or what if Superman had a kid? Or what if Superman was a girl? It's always some specific idea where someone's I want to do a different version of this character. It wasn't on purpose, where they're meant to connect.
Yeah.
And so for a comic book, you can bring someone in through a time gap or a time hole or a time warp. But for a movie, it's hard to care about this movie because I don't even know about Barry yet. How can I care about this universe and these people and these things if I don't know who you are and don't care? Whereas with Spider-Man, I watched 3 Tobey Maguire movies. I watched 2 Andrew Garfield movies. I watched 2 Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland, along with the other Avengers movies. I knew those characters, so I cared about them. This movie, I don't feel like you care as much, and so the multiversal aspects of it are really, really troubled to deal with. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I just think we're kind of, I mean, people are saying superhero fatigue. I think we kind of have a multiverse fatigue. I think we're seeing a lot of multiverse, not just in superhero movies. It's across the genre. Everything's got its own verse, and everything is trying to connect with other things. I think it's a difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp. I think so. You're losing some people there, and I think we want these stories that we watch to mean something. Because if not, then why are we even watching it? You just tune out. Because if you kill somebody here, if you can just bring the actor back and have them play the character over here, then what we saw on screen doesn't mean anything. And that was kind of with Multiverse of Madness, the complaint with having, Jim from The Office get killed as Mr. Fantastic. Because if he's going to be your lead character, which it looks like he's probably not, in a Fantastic Four movie, you just showed us him dying. So I agreed. So I think that you have to be very careful with how you do these films. Like you said with Spider-Man, at the end of a trilogy, I feel like it could work and make things really cohesive and wrap up. But at the beginning of a trilogy, which this wouldn't be a trilogy, but it is intended to be an origin story. And I have to imagine if this movie would have made like $700 million total by the end of it, they would be like, okay, we maybe are going to stick with this Flash. It fits a lot better.
But like that, so it feels like the movie was said, if this movie does well,
what's
we'll
the same
keep
with Aquaman? They
Flash.
haven't given us like.
If they don't, then we'll go another way.
They're very non-committal.
Just stick your flag somewhere and say this is what we're doing, because that's what Marvel did that worked so well for them for Infinity War and Endgame. When Captain America towards the end of Endgame says, Avengers, assemble! It is not just an Easter egg moment to all the time he says it in the comics. It is a war cry of, we have literally had to move heaven and earth to battle to get to this moment. And guess what? We still got to go to war. It hits. It works really well because we care. We're invested in all the things that they've done. Everything that it's one singular universe.
Yep.
So it works because everybody that's on the field, even frickin' Howard the Duck, we have some sort of connection to, and it's one specific timeline. Then you start adding other timelines where, different people can just show up, and it starts to cheapen the effect. This specific movie with The Flash, when Michael Keaton is on the battlefield and you already brought me back, that death feels like it has more value because it's over. The door is closed. We can't open that up. If it comes back, then all of a sudden anybody can return, and it feels cheap. Whereas at the end of Endgame, when Iron Man, I am Iron Man, and he breathes his last breath, Pepper tells him, you can rest now. You can rest.
Yep.
That feels like we can rest. We can rest easy knowing that this saga has come to a close. And sure, it kind of sucks that we don't have Tony Stark. We've talked plenty of times about that choice to let Robert Downey Jr. walk away from that role is different. But that movie is still an awesome movie, despite the flaws other movies have had since then. So I just think it's really challenging to do that. And I think Marvel's seeing the same thing. And they're trying to bring in, their X-Men and Fantastic Four properties. They're trying to bring in the Hulk, all these properties that they've got under one umbrella. And they're rushing movies. And that's what DC has done so poorly, of just rushing movies. I don't know why this movie was different in the Flashpoint. That story is so good. Just do that story. But instead, they had to rush it. And so I think there's just a lot of missed opportunities.
Yeah. The story of the DCEU, missed opportunities.
Gosh, yeah, the brave and the bold.
Sums it up.
What do you think about James Gunn and like his control and kind of moving forward?
I'm fine with it. I think he's just trying to salvage financials for these movies that were pretty close to done. This one, Aquaman, Blue Beetle. I don't know how much hand he had on that movie, but I think that he's just trying to not lose too much money going forward, and then I'm completely fine with whatever his vision is.
I'm on board with James Gunn. I'd love to know behind the scenes, like truthfully, how much he was involved in this movie, what notes he gave, or what changes he kind of forced his executive producing hand on. They'll never actually tell us that in the future, but it'd be nice to know. Same thing with Blue Beetle. I'm actually excited because for the first time, we have like a new origin story that we haven't had in a while. That'll be really fun. And I think that, maybe it's good that this Snyderverse of the DCEU has kind of come to a close. It is what it is. This movie was fine. And I think that there's some things to build off of. I do think that the comic book fatigue, I don't think it's real. I think it's about telling good stories. Because you're in a world where, like, John Wick 4 did amazing.
Yeah.
And, like, why does that movie
Fast and the Furious 10 just came out,
like,
so it's
why do these, like, there are movies that are doing well, and then there are movies that, like, are not doing well. And the movies that do well tend to be ones that were just expertly done, really well crafted, really good directing, really good action, really good actors, really good sequences, blah, 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 blah. Really good movies that are made. So I think that people like James Gunn, DC, the MCU, everybody needs to think about how are we making good movies and telling the right stories. And for comic books, there's so many good stories. When you miss out on the Flash Paradox, which is truly great, go on Max today and just look up any of the animated series made in the past 5 years, from 2018 and beyond, by Warner Brothers Studios. There's so much good animation from DC Animation on there, from Batman: The Dark Knight Part 1, The Dark Knight Returns Part 1, Part 2. Phenomenal source. The Flashpoint Paradox. There's Dark Apocalypse, which is another great story. DC has the characters to be able to do it, and I remember as a kid caring far more about the Justice League than I ever did about the Avengers.
Yeah.
And I was a little bit of a comic book nerd, so I think that they're in good hands with James Gunn, being able to play with like fake cities, like Silver
Central
City
is Flash's city, and
Metro,
Gotham and Metropolis.
I like the idea you mentioned to me about, hey, these characters are going to stay hidden. They're going to maintain their secret identities. It's not based in the real world like other things are. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. And all in all, I'm excited about what James Gunn can do. I will say this: the reason I talk about these like big beefs and like holy truths to the movies is I found myself walking into the theater thinking, well, that was a solid thumbs up B movie. And then as I listened to some of the Easter egg videos and other breakdowns and The Flash Explained, I was like, yeah, this movie sucks. It sucks. But then I had to think to myself, like, no, I'm not going to let the critics tell me what to believe. And I think it's really easy for even us sitting here talking about the movie, criticizing it, and bringing up, like, this was a solid movie. Sure, it's got its faults. Those you can't deny. The blemishes are very visible, but it's a feat to take a movie that's been in development for so long and then carry it to the finish line. I'm excited to see what they can do in the future.
So with that, what is your minivan rating for this movie?
My minivan rating for this movie, 7.5. All its faults, all its failures. I think that the CGI was a terrible choice. I think that Ezra Miller did not totally pull it off. But I think that there are moments that hit really well. The pacing is pretty good for a movie that's over 2 hours long. I wasn't upset about that. I think that the emotional moment really, really drives it home. I think there are people that will sit in theaters that have lost a parent, that have lost a loved one, and that will shed a tear thinking about the moment that he went through and the realization that I can't save everybody. 7.5.
I give this movie a 7. I think that it is a solid movie. I think it's a fun movie. I think if you go to the movies to have a good time, you're going to enjoy this movie. I think that there are a couple of things that could pull you out of it, but largely, unless you're just really going in just wanting to hate this movie, I don't.
And
really
there are people that wanted to go in hating this.
Yeah,
they hate Ezra Miller, they hate DC, they hate James Gunn, whatever it is they hate. They wanted to crap on this movie, and those people are part of the hype. I think that if you just go into this movie and watch it,
yeah. If you like superheroes, you like The Flash, you like Justice League, you like Batman for sure. Go watch this movie. You'll have fun.